Garage Show.
Good morning, everybody. Well, of course, Brexit is dominating absolutely everything, with 9 days to go until Parliament gets to vote on Theresa May's deal. And Liam Fox today, Michael Gove yesterday, urging people in Parliament to vote for this deal so that at least we leave the European Union on March the 29th. But many others saying, hey, hang on a second, we may be leaving, but it's leaving in name only, and in fact we find ourselves completely and utterly trapped, in some ways be worse than where we are now. So we'll debate that between 10 and 11. Are you scared? If this all leads to a no-deal Brexit, is it something to be afraid of? And at 11 o'clock, we'll debate something that I hoped I would never have to debate, and that is the state of UKIP. A big march planned for next Sunday in the name of UKIP, with Tommy Robinson as one of the speakers, and a photograph that emerged from Friday of a planning meeting with people in the room with some very serious criminal convictions and BNP links. And I'll be asking at 11, I want your advice. Do you think I should stay in UKIP, or has my time with the party finished? I'd love to hear from you at 11. The front page of the Sunday Times today has a leaked letter coming from the Attorney-General, Geoffrey Cox. And the letter talks about the protocol known as the backstop. And in the letter it says, the protocol could endure indefinitely. That means forever. And senior ministers are telling the Sunday Times that the Prime Minister is refusing to publish this legal advice because it contains this really stark passage and means we could be trapped in it forever. So Labour are getting together with the SNP, the Greens, everybody, trying to force the government to publish the legal advice. The government don't have to publish the legal advice, but I would have thought, given the import and magnitude of this vote, that we ought to know the truth. What is clear is that with every day that goes by, and we saw Sam Gyimah yesterday standing down as a minister, 10 ministers have now stood down since we've seen this deal. It begins to look, although, the government is going to lose by a very large margin indeed. And unless Parliament unpicks previous legislation, or unless the government puts forward new legislation, we look to be now perhaps on course to leaving on March the 29th without a deal with the European Union, but a negotiated WTO deal. David Davis today in the Sunday Times says this is not crashing out, this is escaping the EU's dead hand. And Davis makes it clear that this is not absolutely the ideal situation, but it's not something to be afraid of. Daniel Hannan makes a very similar point in the Sunday Telegraph. And I have to say, for 25 years, I've always wanted a simple free trade agreement with the EU, but this government didn't even ask for it. So I'm going to ask you, are you scared of us leaving the European Union? Do you believe these terrible projections of apocalypse, of goods not getting into the country, of Kent being a lorry park, of perhaps, as Mark Carney suggested, the economy taking a big downward dive? Or is this all scaremongering that we've heard before? Would leaving with no deal not just save us between 40 and 60 billion, but maybe it's now the only way that referendum result can be delivered? Is it something to be scared of? Well, lots of programmes this morning on radio and television where you've got politicians talking to journalists, but mostly it's journalists talking to journalists. This is where the public get to have their say. Kicking off with Tony from Chichester. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning. The problem we've got is a Prime Minister who keeps contradicting herself. First of all, when she became Prime Minister, she said she wouldn't hold an election. Then she did. She has said countless times there won't be a second referendum, but don't hold your breath. Yep. And she also said no deal is better than a bad deal. So why won't she offer a no deal? We'd be free from the shackles of the European Union completely. We can do trade deals without having our arms tied behind our back. Perhaps I'm being a little bit naive here, Nigel. You can probably correct me. If we were to sort of just leave and just say we're going to carry on trading with you in the same way with no tariffs, they would have to do the same with us, surely. We've got an 80 billion trade deficit with us. They've got to do a trade deal with us.
I think the argument, Tony, the argument David Davis is making is there's still time to do a free trade deal. But I have to say, Tony, time is actually running out. Even though in regulatory terms we're on the same level as them. But what David Davis's point is, the more that you prepare for a no deal, the more likely it is that they come to us ahead of March the 29th and say, hey guys, let's do something.
Exactly.
And I think from a negotiating point of view, that is what you have to do. I mean, look at what Trump's done overnight with China. You know, he threatens.
And they back down.
And they've backed down, and they're going to start buying more American agricultural goods. And that's the way to play this. But if it did come to it, Tony, you know, if the European Commission decided, no, we are going to cut off our nose to spite our face, the Davis argument is there's actually nothing to fear. Yep, tariffs will be charged on our goods. We charge tariffs on their goods. In most cases, those tariffs are between 3 and 4%. I mean, it's less than the monthly currency fluctuation.
Yes, that's right. But why can't we just carry on a free trade deal with them?
Well, because we haven't asked for it, Tony. You know what?
Exactly.
You know what the Prime Minister wanted to do was to keep us wrapped inside the European Union and basically supporting its objectives. I mean, Tony, I'll read this to you. I was flabbergasted on Friday. Steve Barclay, who of course is the new Brexit secretary that nobody'd ever heard of, he tweeted this on Friday. He said, under the Brexit deal, we have agreed to strike an ambitious, flexible and scalable relationship that allows us to combine resources worldwide for maximum impact. So the Brexit secretary is saying we're going to help the European Union be a global player. This is so far away from what we voted, Steve, but it makes you understand, if that's what the British government wants, they never went for a simple free trade deal.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I say that's my point. That in the first place, that she's contradicting herself when she said herself, "No deal is better than a bad deal."
Well, she didn't mean it.
And the European Union want to keep us in because they want our money, and they're doing all they can to either keep us in or force a second referendum and hope that we vote to stay in. And until
Tony,
it's just bullying. It's just bullying.
No deal is better than a bad deal was a phrase that I coined with a group of economists 2 weeks before the referendum. The difference is, Tony, she never meant it. Thank you. Off to Chesterfield to speak to Godfrey, a new caller to this show. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Pleased to speak to you. Two quick things, very quickly.
Yep.
No deal is better than a bad deal, for sure. I've seen lots of paperwork recently and heard a lot on the road about the two surveys that were done by government about stopping in and leaving. Now, just very quickly, I'm choosing my words here, I think, personally, a Labour government would be the very worst of all the options. And I don't know what the scenario is if we go back in. Everyone's saying how much it's going to cost, but those two options to me seem extremely expensive, like staying in or a Labour government.
Well,
they sound very clever, in my opinion.
Well, a Labour government would only happen, Godfrey, if there was a general election. I mean, it's rumoured this morning that if Mrs May can't get her deal through, she puts it back to the House of Commons, threatening Tory MPs, saying, unless you vote for it this time, I'll call a general election. And that's how Labour could get in. Godfrey, I consider that to be pretty unlikely.
Good.
The question is, if her deal doesn't get voted through, what happens? Do we leave on WTO terms, or somehow does Parliament force a second referendum upon us?
No second referendum. If there's another referendum, I shall still vote leave, and then after that, I'll never vote again.
Yeah,
well, I can't believe them.
I think there's a few people in that position. So, Godfrey, you don't want a second referendum, you don't want Labour, but are you scared of, and the phrase that's being used by everybody is crashing out? Does that scare you?
Not really, no. I must admit, though, I'm a lot older than perhaps a lot of your callers, and therefore it probably will affect me a lot less, and that's only fair. But no, not crashing out doesn't really frighten me at all.
Okay.
I believe it's a big scare tactic.
It's an enormous scare tactic. The question is it true? Godfrey, thank you. You're listening to the Sunday edition of Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 10:15. Political tensions in London, but even bigger tensions in Paris. The third weekend of rioting in the Champs-Élysées and elsewhere. We will, in a few minutes, go to Paris and find out what the state of play is. Now, what is really interesting about this is not only is Mrs May's deal hugely unpopular in Parliament. Yes, I know that Liam Fox and Michael Gove are saying we must support it, but actually she looks like she will lose in 9 days' time pretty heavily. But out in the country, the deal has almost got no support at all. Now, Opinion polling, of course, is all over the place, and we learnt back in 2016 not to take it too literally. The People's Vote put out a poll today saying support for remaining in is as high as 55%. But a very interesting piece of work by Delta Poll that came out the other day asked people, did they back no deal over Mrs May's deal? And by 52 to 48, they did. So what seems to me is happening is that leavers are saying, can we please just leave? Or to use the Prime Minister's phrase, can we please just get on with it? Prime Minister, people do want to get on with it, but not in the shape of the withdrawal agreement that you've signed up to. I sense that Leave opinion is hardening significantly. They're saying, let's just do it. And I'm beginning to think that a negotiated WTO withdrawal, I'm beginning to think, is the only possible way on March 29th of delivering what people have voted for. The question is, should we be scared of it? And folks, if you are scared of it, if you're really genuinely worried about what you've heard, you may never have called LBC before, but it's 0345 6060 973. You can text your opinions to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And, of course, Facebookers, you can comment there too. I'm off to Birmingham to speak to Christopher, a new caller to this show. Christopher, we had the Governor of the Bank of England this week, and he was a bit misquoted because he was putting a worst-case scenario. But, a lot of the establishment are telling us, Christopher, that a WTO exit would be really bad for us.
Oh, good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking the call. Nice speaking to you. It's absolutely ridiculous. A WTO is the best possible thing that we could do. All this scaremongering, the only people that should be scared is the EU, because they won't get the 39 billion and they won't have a shackle to them. We are a proud nation. We stand there, we have got everything this country has. We have great people, we have all sorts of things going for us. We should just walk out and get on with it. Head teacher May should step down. She is a disgrace. Half of the Tory party are a disgrace. I have been a Conservative voter all my life. My partner is, my family have been, and we will not be voting Conservative again. I haven't got a clue who we can vote for because they're all dire.
Do you know, Christopher, the first person I met this morning, very early, at a petrol station, bloke got out of the car, hello, Mr Farage, he said, I've been Conservative all my life. He said, I don't think I can vote for them ever again. There are millions of you out there, Christopher. Millions of you. And somehow, the Tory MPs have kept her in position.
Well, we feel disenfranchised, Nigel, because this is not what we voted for. We voted to leave. We had a referendum. If the boot had been on the other foot and it was Remain, we'd have all respected that. But it wasn't. And they're not respecting the vote that the British people had.
No, I'm afraid that
we
is
should just leave.
Right. OK, Christopher, thank you. Thank you. Christopher says just leave, do it on WTO, and it is a view amongst leavers that is gaining ground. He talked there about the EU being scared. Well, of course, the car manufacturers, the wine producers, will be very worried of us leaving on WTO because we could start to buy wine a lot more cheaply from New Zealand and Australia and places like that. And he also mentioned, Christopher, the 39 billion, but actually with the extension of the transition, that's looking a bit more like 60 billion, maybe more. But let me tell you what they're really scared of. The one thing the European Union are terrified of is us becoming competitive. And all the economic modelling that you see from the Treasury, from the Bank of England, saying we'd be that much worse off, is based on the fact that we'd move to that deal and nothing else would change. Everything would stay the same, which of course is absolute rubbish. We would be able to reduce food costs coming into this country from around the rest of the world. And we'd be able, setting our own laws, to become more competitive, if you like, to start undercutting our European competitors. It's the one thing Mr Barnier tried his hardest to do. Don't let us leave the customs union and the rule book, and it's the one thing Mrs May has given into. James is a new caller from Gravesend. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Nigel. First off, I suppose I just have to say I'm not afraid of a no deal, and I will turn to that in a bit, but I'm just really surprised that the EU and the government, Theresa May, the Prime Minister, is continuing with this scare tactic, the fear-mongering, Project Fear 2.0 it seems now. Like, it doesn't work. It does not work. Like, working-class people, as much as they don't think, like, they sort of understand what goes on. They know 90% of politics is spin and lies and fear. And it does not work. You know, we know what's going on. We know what's going on.
I think, James, I think you're right. I think all the things that Osborne told us in the run-up to that referendum that would happen immediately after a Leave vote, they haven't happened, and we just don't believe them. But James, but that said, James, you know, if we do leave in just a few short months on WTO, that is of concern to businesses, because it would be quite a big change, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah, but I sort of echo the comments of your previous caller there. And, you know, we're a country of innovators and inspiring and talented people. And if we can unite behind that idea and fire a rocket up at Parliament's backside...
Well, we did that already.
I know.
They just haven't...
I know, they just haven't followed through. I know, but if we unite behind that idea, this only what would seem a total capitulation of Brexit would stop, and we'd just go through with it and just unite as a country again, because we can't just carry on like this.
I tell you what won't unite the country, and that's the second referendum. You know, Tony Blair said we'll have another referendum, and then when we get the result, we'll unite around that. And I think that's extremely unlikely. James, I thank you for the call. Ali on Facebook says, very sensibly, I think if the legal advice isn't forthcoming in full, then the MP's default position must be to vote against it. And you know what? I think that's right. You know, we understand there are times when governments don't publish all the advice they get. They get advice from all sorts of different people, and they make decisions and they govern. But this is so important. To withhold this, I think, would be outrageous. Norma says it must be a bad deal if Subury is voting against it. Well, yes, it's interesting, isn't it? So you've actually got Remainers voting against it because they hope they can force a second referendum, and you've got Leavers voting against it because they see it as a total capitulation. Just goes to show, Mrs May, if you try and steer a middle path and please everybody, you finish up pleasing no one. Khalid is calling from Edmonton. Good morning to you.
Morning, Nigel. I have to say I'm left bemused by all these people who think no deal is an option. I'm sorry, but it's an absolute nuclear option. There won't be a consensus in Parliament. If Theresa May's deal gets thrown out, which realistically we think it is going to get thrown out, I cannot believe in Parliament there's going to be a consensus for no deal. Do you honestly think there's going to be a consensus for no deal in Parliament?
No, Khalid, there isn't a consensus in Parliament for us leaving the European Union at all, is the truth of it, but let alone a no-deal situation. I mean, no.
But in the absence of a people's vote, Parliament's going to make the decision.
Yes, but...
So what's going to happen? Parliament needs to decide what's going to happen.
But there is an EU Withdrawal Act. It's been debated and voted on in Parliament, and that Act states very explicitly that we are leaving on March the 29th. Now, unless the government wants to introduce a new piece of legislation, we could, even though Parliament's against it, be heading for that option.
That's never going to happen, Nigel. Parliament, Labour, all the opposition parties, even the remaining Conservative parties, will not let a no-deal deal.
Khalid, I have to say, I think, on balance, that you are probably right. I think you're probably right. But getting back to where I started with this, you know, given, Khalid, that 90% of global trade takes place on WTO terms, is it anything to really fear that much?
Okay. If you let me answer it, I think there is, because people like James, who's the last caller, I appreciate people would want to get out, and they voted to get out, and they want to get out. So I understand that concept. What they don't understand is that, unfortunately, working class people in this country are going to suffer the most from a no deal.
Why?
Prices going up.
No, Khalid. No, Khalid.
What, you think inflation won't go up on the basis of a no deal?
No, Khalid, on the basis of a no deal, a British government could reduce these huge tariffs we put on 12,500 everyday goods that people go to the supermarkets and buy. We could, only in a no deal situation, make food and underwear and shoes cheaper.
Yeah, but you and I know, Nigel, negotiating a free trade deal doesn't happen overnight. In the short term, there is going to be short-term pain, real short-term pain, as outlined by the Bank of England and the other reports this way. So there's going to be short-term pain. We can discuss whether in the long term whether we can recover.
Well, Kelly, when you move house, there's some short-term pain, isn't there? You know.
But the no dealers, the Jacob Rees-Moggs of this world, and all the people who they will say that short-term pain is a price worth paying. Okay, they will say that pain that they're going to inflict on the country and on working class people in this country.
And what would the pain be? Because, as I say, I mean, prices.
The pain will be a recession, Nigel. The pain we will go into a recession.
I think, Cully, I think, to be honest with you, there's a recession coming despite Brexit.
And it's going to be even worse.
Why?
If there is, it's going to be. Why? Because there's no frictionless trade, Nigel. We are going to have delays at Dover and at the ports. But prices are going to rise. There's not enough storage space in the country to cover the impact of no deal.
Cully, there are tens of thousands. Hang on.
That's a fact.
Hang on. There are tens of thousands of containers coming into Southampton and Felixstowe from China every single week on WTO terms. Those containers are off those boats and onto lorries before you can say Jack Robinson. I mean, surely it's not beyond the wit of man to sort this out.
But you think if you honestly think that under a no-deal Brexit that Dover will carry on exactly as it is now, without any additional checks by the French, or without any additional checks by the EU, if you think that that's going to exactly carry on the same, you're living in cloud cuckoo land.
If the French want to damage, and given the fragile state of French politics and their economy, if they want to damage their exports to this country, let them do it. Cully, you've made the argument. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 10:30 and time for the news with Philip Chrysikos. Should we be scared of a no-deal Brexit? Would it lead to chaos? Interestingly, Marie says to me, if we don't get what we voted for, people will take to the streets in scenes similar to that in Paris. Marie, I don't think that's true, but you might get some on either side of an argument out on a street having a scuffle, but I don't think tens of thousands of us, I mean, I could be wrong, I don't see tens of thousands of us taking to the streets, but boy, they have been in Paris, and indeed, I saw even in Brussels. Peter Allen, LBC's Paris correspondent, is joining me. Peter, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
I saw photographs of yesterday in Paris, sort of Victor Hugo-style barricades being erected. What on earth went on yesterday?
It was quite incredible. I've covered many riots in Paris over the years. But yesterday was by far the worst I've ever seen. A lot of people I was speaking to saying there's been nothing like it since May 1968, the famous spring riots of that year, when everybody thought there was going to be a revolution. It was extraordinary. There was fighting around the Arc de Triomphe, there was fighting in Place de la Concorde, there was looting at everything from high-class boutiques right down to chemists and pubs and whatever. And again, it was the yellow vests, Nigel. It was the fuel protesters, nominally, but I think there are a lot of other unhappy groups joining in as well.
So this has gone way beyond green taxes. This is now just an excuse to go out and riot.
Exactly. It's a manifestation of massive anger towards the political class here. Everybody thinks the political class is corrupt, useless, it's not reforming, it's not doing anything for the people, and they've got a president who really doesn't represent much. He's not a socialist, he's not a conservative, he's an independent, he's a default candidate. He's in power because the establishment parties were so poor, but he's not doing much, he's not doing anything, and so they all hate him as well.
Is there an element, Peter, of anti-Paris, of anti-the metropolitan elites, not just the president?
Absolutely right. A lot of rich people in Paris, lots of people with lots of flats that they don't need, people who go shopping on the Champs-Élysées and the Rue Saint-Honoré on a Saturday, and the anger is directed towards them. It's a society where people generally lead pretty modest lives. The vast majority of the population want to just have they want the whole of August off, but they want a relative fine life in between, and they want to work hard, but they can't afford it at the moment. The cost of living is huge. Companies are finding all kinds of ways to put up costs. Utilities cost more, phones cost more, everything costs more, and they blame this complacent Paris establishment.
Now, one thing that completely confused me was to see these yellow vests out protesting in Brussels yesterday, which is, of course, in Belgium. What on earth was going on there?
Absolutely right. Well, the main thing about these yellow vests is that they're great marketing, to put it in blunt terms. Yep. They're really selling their revolution to France. And the idea is that it's quite a simple concept. You get one of these yellow jackets that everybody has to carry in the boots of their cars in France and also in Belgium. You put it on your back and you're suddenly a yellow vest. And it's effectively a revolution overflowing into neighbouring countries, as you say. A lot of trouble in Brussels. The hope of the Yellow Vests is that it will slip into Portugal, into Spain, to all kinds of neighbouring countries. Who knows? We may even see them in Britain at one stage.
Well, that's been suggested to me by some of my callers and messages. I'm not so sure that we do things that way here, but who's to say? And Peter, finally, what are the prospects for these protests continue? Because it wasn't just Paris, was it? It was happening in Marseille, I think in Tours. Are they saying these protests go on?
Yes, they will go on, Nigel. Every day, every Saturday until Christmas is the idea, at least. And the idea is that they will humiliate the government, they'll humiliate Mr. Macron, make Paris into a very dangerous place on a Saturday. Lots of Britons come over, don't they, to do their Christmas shopping. Lots of other people come into Paris. They won't come. It will cost a fortune for the Paris economy, for the national economy in cities like Marseille and Toulouse. And, to put it bluntly again, it's been very, very effective. Whether you agree with it or not, none of us like violence, but it is being very, very effective, this campaign.
Clearly. Peter, thank you. That was Peter Allen, LBC's Paris correspondent. As he said, he's covered many riots in France over the years, and they do like a bit of revolt, the French, whether it's the smallholders or whoever it is. Often the fishermen, of course, blocking the channel ports and Operation Stack coming in on the M20 in Kent. But really extraordinarily violent scenes that we saw in Paris yesterday. Isn't it funny that in Paris, people started coming in to protest against green taxes, but in London, we've got protest groups stopping the traffic because they want more green taxes. Only 22 miles separates us, but gosh, we're slightly different political cultures, aren't they? And I really don't think that we will see large-scale street protest if Brexit is stopped like that. We'll see some, but I don't think we do things the same way. So back to the government will not issue at this stage the legal advice from the Attorney General on what the protocol, the backstop, actually means and whether we'd be trapped, perhaps indefinitely, inside a customs union. And if that's true, then what on earth was Mrs May doing at the G20 saying, we'll be able to do free trade deals with all of you very soon, because it simply wouldn't be true. So there's a big, big, big pressure now coming on the government to release that information. And if that then leads to a massive, crushing defeat in the House of Commons, one that can't be overcome, we could be headed towards a no-deal Brexit. Does that scare you? Graham is a new caller from Sheffield. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel.
Are you scared? Are you scared, Graham, by the prospect of no deal?
I think it will lead in the short term to disruption if there's not been enough preparation. But in the long term, I think that since we trade with so many countries around the world on World Trade Organization, and although it's not what I do now, I was in business and industry for 15 years, and we always found a way to actually do things. And I think that we are a nation of entrepreneurs. But the reason I rang, Nigel, what I find so interesting is Nick Clegg used to be the Sheffield Hallam MP.
Yep.
And I bumped into him when he'd set up a stall in the local village centre and obviously was campaigning for Remain. Now, having spent quite a lot of my time both living and working around Europe, I decided that I wanted to chat to him for his views because I was genuinely undecided. I was originally in favour of the idea of an EEC, as was my family, but I was concerned at what I saw as the increasing power grab by Brussels. And in particular, I wanted to know what his views were in the event that we voted to leave.
Yep.
He, of course, was saying, no, we'll remain. So trying to get him to actually say what he thought about leave was like trying to pin jelly to the wall. Eventually, he agreed, and I quote, if in the unlikely event that we vote to leave, that's it, we leave. And I said, no second referendum? He said, no second referendum. I said, what about trying to undermine or overturn Brexit? He said, no, leave. Well, effectively, he said, leave means leave. Now, yeah, I know, that's what I thought too. I then pointed out to him that the Irish, the French, and the Dutch, and I didn't realise at the time, but also the Danes, had all been told, you voted the wrong way. And in the case of the Irish, they were told to vote again until they got the right answer.
As were the Danes, yeah.
As were the Danes. And in the case, as I understand it, of the French and Dutch, the government sort of ignored it and found a way to get round it via the back door.
Yes.
To which Nick Clegg replied, oh, that's undemocratic. That couldn't possibly happen here.
Well, since, Graham, that conversation you had with him, since that conversation, not only is he now saying that we have to effectively have an exit from Brexit, he's got a knighthood too. How do you feel about that?
This is a programme that four-letter words probably...
No, please don't. Please get me in terrible trouble.
It would. And I find it interesting, of course, that last October he published a book, what was it, How to Stop Brexit?
Yes, that's right.
But I think there are several wider issues on this which I'd like to comment on, if I may.
Comment on one, Graham, because time is short.
Right. Well, leaving aside... the one I'd like to comment on, then, is the accusation that people who voted didn't know what they were voting for, which has always been aimed at Leavers.
Yep.
And it would be fair to say that I actually started as a Remainer before the election day, and I've ended up as a fervent Brexiteer. Why? Because things like the European Army, we were promised it wasn't going to happen.
And it is now happening.
And it's happening.
Yep.
But I said I was in business for 15 years. I'm now actually in higher education. And I deal with students 18 to 25 plus on a daily basis. And although this is a straw poll rather than, pure academic research, I have been asking them, how have you voted and why? And it's probably about 60-40, although one of the first years said that his sixth form, it was more like 90-10, if they'd been able to vote in favour of Remain. So I asked why. And the typical answer was because it's the status quo.
Yeah.
And that's what my mates are doing. Now, when I asked them if they'd ever heard of a guy called Count Kudenova-Kalergi and the Kalergi Prize and the EU's aims of the federal United States of Europe, mixing everybody up, they went, no. I said, have you even visited the EU's websites and looked at their aims? No. And these are undergraduates, by the way. So I said, so in that case, why... why...
Status quo. Graham, I'm going to have to leave it there, but you're right. It is the power of the status quo, and much in life is the power of what your mates are doing. But actually, far from a status quo, since that referendum, it's European army, it's the ambition to remove veto from foreign policy too. And yet Stephen Barclay, the Brexit Secretary, seems to want us to support all of that. It's beyond me. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 10:46. If we're headed towards no deal, are we scared of no deal? And if you are scared, you tell me. 0345 6060 973. Mark says, I predict UKIP will wipe the floor with the Conservatives and Labour at the next general election if Brexit is betrayed. Well, Mark, I think the potential, the possibility electorally for UKIP has never, ever been better. But I think the party's headed in a very bad and worrying direction, and I'm having to consider very carefully my own future within it. And at 11 o'clock, I'll talk to you about one or two of the press stories that are out today that are true. And I should be asking for your advice. Do you think if UKIP's now to link up with the far right, I should stay with it or not? So we'll do that from 11 o'clock. I'm off to Edinburgh. Lisa, we could be headed for no deal. We're told it could be... I listened to Sir Keir Starmer this morning saying it would be catastrophic. Are you scared of that?
Hi, Nigel. No, I'm not. I think all of this is just scare stories, and a lot of people around the world, more prosperous countries than Britain and the European Union, actually trade according to WTO rules. So... I think, really this is just a red herring, really. And like the Irish border, I come from Canada, and we've always had a border between the United States and Canada, and it's pretty frictionless. And
yes,
they trade a lot of goods and services, and per capita, it's far higher than the than European Union. So.
Would you know, very interesting, Lisa, very interesting. on this Irish border, this whole backstop, us being trapped in a customs union to stop a hard border. So the Irish government say they, under no circumstances, including, by the way, no deal, would build a hard border. We have said under no circumstances would we put up a hard border. When Mr Barnier was asked whether the European Union would put up a hard border, he said no. And interestingly, the World Trade Organization themselves, Lisa, on Friday said that there'd be no need for a hard border if the UK leaves on WTO terms. It's almost like it's been the great hoax, hasn't it, of the Brexit negotiations?
Yes, I agree. And it's really like my friends, in North America, Canada and the United States, they're really incredulous about this, what's going on here. Nobody understands what's going on and why we're getting so into these deals, and why there was even further integration with the European Union to begin with, because we've always had a free trade deal with the United States and Canada, and it's worked fairly well.
Yeah,
there are a few squabbles because the Canadians unfairly subsidize the products and things, but
there is some agricultural tariff, and I know that goods go back and forth on that bridge from Detroit to Canada. But I've looked at that, and rather than any stops or checks, everything's registered online. Everyone knows the companies.
It is. It's pretty fairly frictionless too. And I just wanted to say too that the United States, in many ways, the issue of standards, which Jeremy Corbyn is always going on about, is that it's very complex, and it's much more complex than he makes out. It's not like if we trade with the United States, then it's not going to necessarily mean lower standards. And
in many areas, Lisa, it might mean higher standards. I agree with that.
Than the European Union. And for instance, workers' safety is there are more deaths in the EU than there is in America. And America has higher water and air standards, for sure.
They're very interesting points, Lisa. And, of course, I guess standards in America have to be higher because, hey, if you get sued in America, the sums of money are eye-watering. Lisa, thank you for that. And, Canada, America, get on with it. They do it. There's no reason why we can't do the same. Jenny on Facebook says, a no deal is what we want. May is arrogant and self-serving. A lot more people, a lot more levers now coming to the view that no deal is the only way Brexit's going to be delivered. Phil is calling from Finchley. Good morning, Phil.
Morning, Nigel. I'm not one of those perhaps you want to talk to.
What on earth do you mean by that, Phil?
Leave 2.5 years ago.
Phil, hang on. The point of this show is we speak to everybody with all different opinions, and we do so in a civil manner. So if you want to disagree with me,
hello,
you're very welcome to.
Nigel?
Yeah, hello? Hello? Oh, well, he's disappeared. Never mind. Let's go to Taunton and speak to Ian. Ian, hello.
Hello, Nigel. How's it going?
Good morning. Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? We've had all these different arguments have gone on for 2 years, and we're almost back to where we started, that some people are saying remain and some people are saying just leave.
I've got to be honest, Nigel, I'm very, very angry with the blithe assertions that a no deal will be fine. Speaking as a dairy farmer...
Yes.
The food industry in Britain, and by the food industry I mean everything from dairy farmers, beef farmers, whatever kind of farmer, the industries that support them, the logistics in and out with goods, the logistics of the supplied goods into food processing, the processes, the industries that supply them. The whole thing from top to bottom is Britain's biggest industry by some way. If we crash out of the EU on WTO rules, we're stuck with 80%. Now, the idea that May's deal is a bad one because it locks us into EU rules, why would that be a bad thing? Because at the end of the day, Mr. Farage,
we voted against the deal.
EU, I've still got to adhere to the EU to be able to export into the EU. And the idea that it's going to be some wonderful panacea where I can export to China or America,
Ian,
there is no point in me exporting to these countries because nobody in Britain can compete with them on a financial basis.
Let's get a handle on the UK economy, shall we?
Well,
only 12% of the UK economy is exports to the European Union. Why should the other 88% have to adhere to EU rules?
Well, why on earth should there be? The problem is, every business that exports to the EU also exports to other parts of the world.
And 95% of business. Ian, I'm going to make this point again.
You do not want to say, "Oh, we'll get in the black labour and we'll cut all the safety standards."
Ian, 95%.
But we'll have to put them back in to export to the EU.
95% of UK companies don't trade overseas. Why should they be wrapped up in EU rules? Why should they not be able to be more competitive? And of course you're right.
How are they going to be more competitive when you're speaking about removing tariffs on goods from third countries, which mean that they're then going to come in and undercut them? At the end of the day, Mr Farage, the important part of our economy, very important part of our economy here, Mr Farage,
you want to keep food expensive,
is the manufacturing sector in this country. It is the thing that is the basis of our entire economy. It's the bit that generates the cash that spreads the stuff around later on. Between manufacturing and, to a certain extent, financial services.
Yeah, but Ian,
all the rest of it, generate cash.
Ian, we've done this debate. It was in the referendum. We
haven't done this debate.
We voted to leave.
I've never heard anybody say to me what is going on with this, and nobody from either leave or remain has ever said to me, "Look, this is what's going to happen." Well, I'm telling you as a dairy farmer that, I can't wait 6 months for some deal to be hammered out with somebody. When I send, when my factory gets a phone call from, say, Paris and says, "We want a tank load of cream, Mr. Muller," they can't send that tanker there unless they know it can drive down the M6 or the M1 or whatever it is, and get onto a ferry and go straight there.
Well, if the French fishermen are protesting, Ian, if the French fishermen are protesting or Operation Stack's in, even as EU members, you've had problems with that, haven't you?
Let's be serious about this.
Let's be serious about this, Ian. Let's be. Are you telling me?
We're looking at months of.
Are you telling me that the M20 will be a lorry park for the next 50 years?
Pardon?
Are you suggesting that the M20 will be a lorry park for decades to come?
I'm certainly suggesting the M20 will be a lorry park until all these negotiations are hammered out. And if we crash out without a deal,
I tell you what, Ian, it'll be a negotiated no deal, and we better crack on with it. Ian, dairy farmer there, very, very concerned.